Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Ball of Collusion, the plot to rig an election and destroy a presidency. That's the title of the seminal new book authored by the widely respected Andrew McCarthy, which breaks down in explicit detail how high Obama law enforcement and intelligence officials set up Donald Trump during the 2016 presidential campaign and then proceeded to try and take down his presidency. In the first part of our interview, which we played you a couple of weeks ago, Mr. McCarthy laid out the gory details of how George Papadopoulos was set up as an unwitting dupe and how it all spiraled down from there and ultimately led to the Robert Mueller special counsel investigation. And as we pick up our discussion now, Andrew McCarthy explains that the FBI surveillance of Trump led to not a criminal investigation, but a counterintelligence probe, which means President Obama, by definition, must have known about it.
Counterintelligence investigations are done only for the president. The only purpose of doing counterintelligence investigations is to gather information so that the president can protect the country against foreign threats to American interests. So when things are working as they're supposed to be working, a foreign counterintelligence investigation is done for the president in the first place. There would be no reason for a president to be insulated from such an investigation. And obviously here you're talking about the extraordinary use of these counterintelligence powers to monitor the opposition party's campaign. So this would have been the kind of thing that in a normal circumstances, not that there's anything particularly normal about that, that the president would be, and the White House would be being kept apprised of it. And we, of course, have indications both in the text messages between Strzok and Page, in the news reporting, particularly with respect to Michael Flynn, where it was explicitly reported based on government leaks from the Obama administration that administration officials were monitoring that investigation, that the FBI was reporting to them. And also a key meeting, which I write about in the book, on January 5th, 2017, which occurs in the Oval Office with President Obama and a small group of national security officials the day before they're planning to go up to Trump Tower to brief President-elect Trump on Russia's interference in the election, and where a topic at the White House meeting we know was what information could be shared versus withheld from the incoming Trump team. We know that President Obama participated directly in the decision-making in connection with this investigation.
Now, we hear much about James Comey and the FBI when it comes to the surveillance of the Trump campaign, but what about the other key players, particularly CIA Director John Brennan and James Clapper, Director of National Intelligence? Where and how exactly do they fit into this narrative?
Well, I think the key player in the narrative is John Brennan, who was the CIA director for President Obama. Originally, he was President Obama's, I believe, Homeland Security advisor at the White House, and then I think it was in the second term, he became the CIA director. There's a history of the CIA and the intelligence community widely in the Obama administration using and distorting American intelligence in support of administration storytelling and political narratives, such as this whole nonsense about how the Benghazi atrocity was caused by an anti-Muslim video. That's probably the most notorious event, but it's hardly the only one. Mm-hmm. I think Brennan was involved in this from the beginning. As I noted before, I think the strands of intelligence that became the ultimate investigation go back to the second half of 2015, shortly after Donald Trump joined the campaign. And this is not me reading tea leaves. Brennan himself has testified in congressional hearings that he was something of a clearinghouse, that he wanted to make sure that all of the information that was coming in to the intelligence community from foreign sources was made available to the FBI because the CIA, by its charter and by federal law, is not allowed to operate domestically. My theory in the book, and I think that history bears this out, is that President Obama, in April of 2016, in a national television interview by Chris Wallace on Fox News, made it very clear, very publicly, that he did not want Mrs. Clinton to be charged. He rationalized that her offense wasn't that big of a deal and claimed that she was essentially innocent because she hadn't intended to harm national security, even though a motive to harm national security is not an element of of the offenses she was being investigated for. To my mind, once the commander-in-chief, the head of the Obama administration, announced that he didn't want Mrs. Clinton charged, Mrs. Clinton was not going to be charged, and the rest is all details. There was no way the Obama Justice Department was going to charge her, and certainly the FBI, which doesn't have charging authority, was not going to charge her.
Now, with the maximum degree of specificity you feel comfortable with, what exactly do you expect the Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz to uncover in his internal investigation of how the Justice Department conducted this surveillance of Trump or participated in it?
Well, I think that from what I understand from the reporting, that Horowitz is focused on what's generally referred to as FISA abuse, and what he's homing in on is what the FBI presented to the FISA court and how forthcoming they were, both about the background of their main informant, Christopher Steele, the information that was withheld from the court about Steele, particularly that he was actually working for the Democratic National Committee and the Trump and the Clinton campaign ultimately. And I think also what Horowitz will look at closely is how the FBI performed as assessed by the requirement in their own procedures that they only present verified information to the FISA court. Seems very clear to me that the information that was presented to the court was not only not corroborated, in some instances it was flatly wrong, and in some instances it was knowingly wrong.
So taking into account that those under investigation are now part of the so-called swamp, the Washington establishment, and that the media is almost certain to try and minimize any damage to the Democrats, what do you envision as the worst that could happen to Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and James Comey and John Brennan and James Clapper and Hillary Clinton or anyone else?
Well, I try not to get out in front of that sort of stuff. I really, as I've said to, as I say in the book, and as I've said to any number of people, I think if you make the potential prosecution of the people who are involved in this, and if you go into it with an eye that they were involved in a well planned out conspiracy from the get-go, rather than that they made egregious errors in judgment as they went along, it's going to be very hard to get to the bottom of what happened here. So my advice, for what it's worth, is that we need to get a full factual rendering, a reckoning of what actually happened here. And then if it turns out that, people made black and white misrepresentations to courts and the kind of thing that gets prosecuted all the time, then I'd say let the chips fall where they may. But for those who think that the comeuppance here is that there's going to be some massive conspiracy case against Justice Department officials and the FBI, and that the Clinton emails investigation is actually going to be resuscitated and revised, even though most of it is stale and beyond the statute of limitations for federal law enforcement, I think they're going to be sorely disappointed. We should just hope here that we get to the bottom, we get a full accounting of what happened, and we can take whatever reasonable steps are necessary to try to prevent it from happening again.
So let's get a conclusion. Was this, as you see it, the insurance policy against the possibility, however long it may have been, of Trump being elected, and then the soft coup d'etat that Trump supporters have claimed it to be?
Well, coup d'etat is a kind of an extreme characterization of this, in that I do believe that they wanted to make Trump's presidential term as short as they could make it. And what I mean by that is, if they could find a crime that was worthy of impeachment and removal, that they'd be able to verify, and they'd be able to convince enough senators, which is a high bar in our impeachment law, to remove the president, I'm sure they would have done it. But I've always thought that the main goal here was political, and that it was to basically render Trump politically unelectable by the time of the 2020 election, with the understanding, again, that if they could remove him before then, they would. But I always thought the counterintelligence was a pretext for doing a criminal investigation without a predicate crime. The criminal investigation is a pretext to get impeachment talk going, and the impeachment chatter is, again, a pretext for what is ultimately the goal here, which is a political one, to make Trump a one-term or shorter president.
The book is Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. The author, Andrew McCarthy, has been our guest. Mr. McCarthy, many thanks for spending some good time with us today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Good luck with the book.